Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's session, Unveiling the Magic of CI/CD for SQL Server using GitHub Actions. In this expert session, we are going to unveil some of the magic behind the scenes. So before we get started, just want to thank all of the sponsors for this year's SQL Bits.
Of course, it's not going to work.
Because without all of the sponsors, events like this would not be possible.
Why is my clicker not working? Did you do something?
No. We got page up. Slight technical fault, everybody.
Why? Come on, work with me. There we go.
So, again, take two. So yeah, like I was saying, without sponsors, events like this would not be possible, so thank you. So, what are we covering then, Sander?
So, for the next not 60 minutes, 50 minutes or so, we're going to talk about GitHub, and how you can use it to do your workflows and use GitHub Actions. We're going to talk about how you can set up your branching models to make sure that you just don't, that it confirms to your, like your development process, right? Then we're going to talk about if we're going to do stuff in the cloud or locally on-premise. And we're going to talk about runners, because runners do all the work for us. We're going to talk about the workflows themselves. We're going to talk about secrets, because secrets are important. Don't put passwords in your actions or in your workflows, because I will personally go to you and kill you, because I've seen it happen too many times. We're going to talk a little bit about unit testing, because how many people do unit testing? Not enough. But thank you. At least there's a couple. And in the end, Kevin is going to do some really cool demos. So I'm not going to do demos. I'm going to be pretty and stand here and talk about all kinds of stuff. So this is me. I am Sander. I work for Data Masterminds. I'm from the Netherlands. I have about 20 years of experience in IT. I feel really old at this moment, because I started when I was 18. I've worked in a variety of industries, from agriculture to financial industries to healthcare. I've seen it all. I'm a Microsoft MVP for developer technologies. It means that I do a lot of stuff with PowerShell and with DataOps, because that's developer related. I'm a major contributor to the DBA tools project. How many people use DBA tools? Still not enough, but thank you for the ones that raised their hand. Go download DBA tools. It works great. It saves so much trouble. Actually, we help a lot with DBA tools at Data Masterminds. So if you want to follow me on Twitter, that's my Twitter handle. I'm not that socially active, but if you send me something, I will probably look at it. I have a blog, and if you have any questions after this session, feel free to send me an email. I'll try to reply as fast as I can, right? There are a couple demos that I will be referencing. This is my repo. Go to the presentations repository, and I've got a whole wide range of demos there, free for you to use, reteach, change them, do whatever you want to do with them. And now Kevin has a slightly more complicated bio than me, so go ahead, Kevin.
So hi everyone, yeah, my name's Kevin Chan, and I am a manager for a company in the Netherlands. However, as some of you can probably tell, I'm actually originally from the southwest of the UK. So basically, I'm an Englishman who graduated 10 minutes away from here, living in the Netherlands, because he met a woman in Australia. Now, if you kept up with all of that, you are in a good place for this session. So, I've been working in IT since the days of Windows 95, and that's probably as much I should say about that. And over that time, I've worked in various sectors, including the banking, oil, and the health insurance industries. Over that time, I've gained various certifications, like the two you can see on the screen here. I'm also a Microsoft certified trainer, and in addition to that, I'm also what's known as a dual category MVP. So I've got awards for both data platform and developer technologies.
Show off. Sorry. I just have one.
So, just like my co-presenter, you can find me in a few places online. You can also find me on Mastodon as well, on a very similar handle. I'm on LinkedIn, have my own blog where I talk a lot about data platform and developer technologies, strangely enough. And I have a GitHub site like Sander does as well, where I share some templates you can use for CI/CD stuff.
Cool. That was it?
That was it.
Finally. So, branch strategies. So, when you install Git, it's always the main branch, right? But that doesn't work with us because we have to do a lot more with it because we have to separate dev and features and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to go through a couple of examples how we can do that. And then I'm going to show you how to do that with a couple of the strategies. Small thing, what are branches? Branches are basically pointers to a snapshot of changes, right? So if you go from one branch to another, it's just a reference to that amount of changes that we have. Like this, you can just make new branches, development features, all these kind of things. But there are different, this is really annoying, it's not working. So these are a couple of examples how we can set up our branching. So there is, these are used in the field, but you can use parts of these to actually make sure that they fit your development process. You've got Git flow, trunk-based ways of doing this, and the GitLab flow. So if we go into those, this is one of the first flow, branching models that we actually had. It has a branch for every single hotfix, releases, development, features, and you go back up and forth. And it has some pros and cons to that, because it's a complete set of rules, right? It's completely documented how it should work. Very thorough, very detailed, easy to scale, but because it's very detailed, it's really complex, and it's not very agile, right? So we don't want to use this in most development scenarios. The next one is the GitHub flow. Guess who created that? They actually don't use it themselves, but so we get rid of all the other kinds of branches. We only have feature branches, and when a feature gets tested, hopefully, it gets merged into the main branch, and it will then be hopefully pushed to a production release. With that, it's really clear and simple, right? So the cons is there's no complexity there. Makes it easier for teams to make quick changes. And continuous deployment is a must, otherwise it's not going to work. Speed comes at a cost, right? So it's not well organized. You need something to organize this around, otherwise it's going to be a mess. Some other cons, harder to test for multiple features together. So if you have a lot of development, you have a lot of features going like this, it can be hard to do the correct tests in your workflow. So, and the main branch is both development and production. Kinda not what I want. GitLab flow is completely different. That's based on environments. Right, you can split it on based on environments, and then you have like your staging, your prod, and your pre-prod, and then features if you want to have that separated. But it gets tested in all environments. Really nice, right? You know what lives in production. Production is the thing that main is not even your production release; it's only your production.
We have a question.
We have?
Fake, do we? I know, sorry, it's one person's arm behind another. Carry on.
Don't interrupt. So, and there's only one way. It's like a water flow method. So you go from one way and you just develop, and then you release. You have to assume that your main branch is free of errors. Otherwise, it's shit all the way down. Like turtles all the way down, but then all your errors are going to be in every single branch. No release validation and hotfixing. So if you have a hotfix outside of all the other branches, you have to update all your branches. So take care of that. Some popular merge strategies that we have merge fast forward, no fast forward, squash, and rebase. With merge, we have, first of all, this is a normal, before the merge, you have like your commits, you commit 1 and 2, and if you have a no fast forward, you create another commit, and then it gets merged into your main branch, or any other branch, but in this case, the main branch. With fast forward, we don't create another commit, we just push it right up to that branch. With squash, if you have like thousands and thousands of commits, it can be hard if you do something like if you use your commit documentation. I hope your commits have proper messages, right? You can use that documentation in your releases, your release documentation. If you have like thousands, that's going to be a hassle to actually make it work. So we can squash it down to like one commit, and then do the merge after that. Rebase, I have only used rebase actually when I really screwed up a repo. Happened a lot in the beginning. So what you do is you have your commits and you kind of merge it right back into the main branch. So these are the most popular merges that we can do. Some common applications. Anybody here probably knows about Azure Data Studio, Visual Studio. They have great integration with Git, right? We need the Git SCM for actually doing something with Git, but we also have the Git GUI. Who uses the Git GUI? Serious? Good. I'd rather just use the command prompt. I'm a PowerShell guy, so I do everything from the command prompt. So just use any of the other tools, right? The GUI that comes with Git is not very efficient. So, I think Kevin is going to do some demos.
I am indeed. So, now that some slides have been covered. So who's working with Git at the moment? Just out of interest. There's quite a few people. So as a lot of you know already, there's various ways you can work with Git and your branching strategies. So one way you may not be aware of is that you can do it directly within GitHub. So as you can see here, I just got a standard repository. If I scroll down, load of code here. So, yeah, that was done on purpose. I want to use the keyboard, everybody, as somebody's just pointed out, to show there's no smoke and mirrors in this demo. So, if you press the dot button whilst you're inside a GitHub repository, this is what happens. It opens up a lightweight development editor that you can use. And from here, you can do quite a few different things. And as you may notice, it's basically a cut-down version of Visual Studio Code. So from here, I can open up Explorer. I can view the files. I can make a change. So for example, here, I can just change on there. No need to press save in this particular version, though the saving is dynamic. Then I can say here, for example, I can do that. And then do a commit, and to help with some jargon here, a commit is basically hardening a change to the Git repository. And I can also show you how to do it with branches as well. So I'll just create a new branch quickly, and I'll show you a nice experience with this. So go to create a branch, and I'll just call it feature there. I'll put it feature new. So you can switch to the branch. And the good thing about this lightweight dev editor is that it gives you lots of useful prompts, which is why I want to show you this now quickly. So sometimes it can take a while to load.
We're streaming on our Wi-Fi connection.
So if I go back to the same one here, and I just make a change again. And then from here, I'm just going to harden it. So from there, I can then look to do a pull request. As you can see, the actual pull request icon is actually here, once I've done the change in a new branch. So I can click on here, and as you can see, it's got a very nice user-friendly experience for me to actually create a pull request. So I can just do on the create here. And this is where it gets very user-friendly, because as well as creating the pull request in GitHub for you, if I go down to the bottom here, you can see I can actually go to merge the commit directly into the branch. So if I click on here now, I might go for merge. And then wait for it to be done. And I can delete the branch afterwards. Now, that's how you can do it directly within GitHub. Of course, you can do it for other applications as well. So for example, if I go directly over now to terminal a minute. So you can open it directly in Azure Data Studio. And for this demo, I thought as well, just a little nice thing, a very nice, easy way you can open up a repository straight away using the command line. And you can do the same with Visual Studio Code as well, just by using the code command instead. So from here, once it's opened, I can browse through again. So for example, I have an extension installed called Database Projects. This allows me to view all the objects in a database project in a very nice way. So I can go through, and then if I want to, make the change again and sync it up, etc. And you can work from branches here, the same as I showed you just now. So that's it. And back over to you.
So GitHub runners. Runners are actually the programs that we run to get our actions executed. So they do all the work. So they do all the processing of all the actions. They run on Windows, Ubuntu, or Mac OS, right? All the OSs. So you can have a lot of choices in there. They can be GitHub. They can be on GitHub in the cloud or self-hosted. And the hosted image for GitHub is the same as for Azure pipelines. So Microsoft actually did something. If we're going to use the same image, saves us a lot of trouble. The Windows and Linux run on the standard DSTv2 image. So if you wonder what the performance is for your runner, you can actually look up the specs for that. So it's an amount, like 2 CPUs, certain amount of memory for that to run. And the Mac OS images, well, we need to check that, but as far as I know, only run in the US. So if you have anything in the cloud, you want to run a Mac OS, you can only run it in the US.
So does that basically mean if you're doing anything for Mac OS and you've got to work with GDPR, you're basically going to have to use self-hosted runners, yeah?
Yeah. Right. One thing about your runners, make sure you run in the right image that you want to use. So if you don't need to use the Windows or Mac OS image, just use the Ubuntu one. It's way cheaper because 1 minute in Ubuntu is 1 minute, but 1 minute in the Windows image or in the Windows runner is 2 minutes. That's being calculated, being used. And I think Mac OS is 5 or 10 times that, so it's really expensive. If you want to run a Mac OS runner and you do that in the cloud, you're going to run through your credits really fast. So make sure if you don't have to use Windows or Mac OS, run it on Ubuntu.
And the self-hosted Linux images, they have Docker installed by default, yeah?
Yep. So some optimal settings, we can use it for GitHub. If you want to do anything in the cloud, just use the GitHub one, right? That is basically what most of the people will do if you have a GitHub account. Self-hosted is for local deployments. So if you want to do anything locally and push that to one of your local servers, you can use local runners that way. Always use self-hosted for custom apps. It's just way easier to do. Avoid running it as a service. Ask Kevin why. He will tell you why that actually should not run as a service, just as an application. And make sure you create your runner at the right level. So if you have a lot of private repositories, make sure you create your runner at the organizational level and not in every single repository because it's way more efficient, right? So all your other private repositories will have the runner from your organization. And enable long paths. So this was something that Kevin came with me like yesterday. So thank you for changing the slides. So if your path is longer than 256 characters, you have to go into the registry and change a couple things to make sure that that is enabled in Windows 10 and 11, right? So
I happen to have the website for it here that I can show you all, because you have to opt into using long paths. For some reason, it's not there by default. So just be aware of that if you're looking to use self-hosted runners.
Cool. So configuring workflow, this is your part, right?
It is. That means I'll have to use the
go.
clicker and everything. So yeah, so this is where we're going to cover the actual SQL Server related deployments now. And we're going to cover two types of deployments in this session. First, the deployment of the SQL servers themselves, we'll quickly cover that. And then we'll talk a bit more about the SQL Server database deployments, which basically means to do the updates to the schemas. So there's various ways you can deploy your actual SQL servers in your environment. So you can use, for example, ARM templates. You can use Bicep. Now, just out of curiosity, who's using ARM templates for their deployments at the moment? It's magic.
As 1, 2.
Who is using Bicep? So quite a few more there. So you can also use Terraform as well. So is anybody using Terraform right now? So it's actually quite popular. Okay, and who is using Preliminary? There you go.
Good.
So there's a few different ways you can do those deployments. And now we'll cover about the database side of it. So
I don't do anything with databases.
So for example, as you can see here, you can use a deployment pipeline to go through the different environments for testing. And there are actually a couple of different ways you can do this. You can do it either what's known as state-based deployment. So you take the entire state of something, usually you catch it in a database project, and then you create a DATPAT file for deployment. Or you can do a migration-based deployment, and that's where you add scripts over time. And there's advantages to both and some disadvantages as well. So the first demo I'm going to do is a state-based deployment one.
Mm-hmm.
So if we go back over to Azure Data Studio, and this is basically the same one that we did earlier. So I'm just going to just quickly save that. And then what I'm going to do, once you've made a change and you've saved it in Azure Data Studio, you'll get some nice colors up here. So I'm just going to go to source control and say I've changed the column. I'm going to harden the change again. And as you can see here, GitHub very kindly invites me to synchronize the changes. So I can just synchronize the change with the GitHub repository. So if we jump back over there here now. So if I click on pull request, and again, this is where GitHub will help you out, because when you look at it from the top, you think, oh, I've got to click new pull request, but if you scroll down, and you go to select a new pull request from here, and it actually gives you some other examples, and not the one I actually wanted to cover here. So that branch hasn't synced up properly, so let me go back over Azure Data Studio. Right, so I will actually quickly show you what happens instead. So on project, that's why, thank you. So let's go back over here. So if I go back to the right project.
It's like we've never done this before, right?
So as you can see, GitHub tells you you've done a compare and pull recently. So we're just going to click on there, scroll down, and create the pull request. So as you see here, what I have to do then is click on merge the pull request. after it's done its checks. I got a bit impatient there. And I will keep the branch there for now because all I want to quickly do, if we go over the actions, you can see it's actually started a workflow. So when you do a deployment in GitHub, you do it through what's known as a workflow. Might sound very complicated. It's just basically a YAML file. So if I scroll down to here and go into the code and click on this particular one. Apologies for those of you who do not like YAML. However,
how can you not like YAML?
If you are working with GitHub Actions, you can only work with YAML at this moment in time. So if I scroll down here, for example, you can see that the trigger is set to the pull request on main. And if I scroll down, what it does first, it takes all of those files out in that particular database project. It then does a build. It basically creates a dat pack. And then you can upload that dat pack once it's been created. And then use the same dat pack file to do the deployments. So if I scroll further down, you can see I'm using various what are known as GitHub Actions. So if you ever see something with this style of syntax, and I'll make this a bit bigger for you all, with a slash in it, that means that it's a GitHub action. And we'll talk a bit more about those shortly. So some of you may have noticed, is anybody using GitHub Actions for SQL Server deployments at the moment? Nope. So I'm using a version of an action of 1.3. And this is because currently there can be an issue if you use the latest version, which is version 2. Now, version 2 works great if you're deploying to Azure. So if you're looking to deploy, for example, the Azure SQL database, it's fine. So that is basically a very short introduction on how you do it for state-based deployments. In addition to that, something else I want to quickly show you all as well. So if we go back over to here, and if we go back, as you saw earlier, we've got a database project. You get the nice view in Azure Data Studio, and if you explore it, it's actually a lot of files. So for example, if we go back into GitHub, make it a bit smaller again. Click on the code here. So if you change your resolution, by the way, everybody, too high, it hides the code for you, so you have to click on View Code. So if I scroll further down here, and I scroll down, this is a traditional kind of SQL proj file that you get with your traditional database project. As you can see, it's quite long, and it will contain everything, all the files that it needs to do the deployment towards the bottom. However, there is now a nice new way that you can create a more streamlined SQL proj file. So if you have the latest version of .NET, for example, installed, you can just use this command. And I'll zoom in a bit more here for everybody. There. Do this way instead. And doing that, I've just created a new database project for SQL Server 2022. And what I can do, open it up in Azure Data Studio, and go over to Explorer. And that, as you can see, this SQL proj file is a little bit smaller than what I just showed you.
Just a little bit.
Just a tad. And the really good thing about this new style, the official term is SDK style of project, is that by default, it supports something called globbing. So you don't have to reference the SQL files in there anymore. You can just put them wherever you want to in your database project. So it's worth looking into, to be honest with you. So now that's over with, I will look to show you how to do migration-based one. So, click on over to this one. It's a bit smaller. So, the migration-based one, there are a few different ways you can do this. There are some open source solutions, and then there's some premium tools. Now, these premium tools have got premium features. Of course, they do come at a cost. So in this session, we show an open source solution. And it's based on what's known as a DBA framework. Now, does anybody use DBA out of curiosity? Right.
I think a lot of people are not doing deployments with SQL Server at the moment.
Maybe that's why.
That's why they are here, right? So.
So I can show you how this looks in Visual Studio Code. So basically, you set up a structure like this in your C# project. And then you can just add scripts to it over time. And every time you run the deployment, it logs an entry in a table in the SQL Server database for you. It can build up quite a lot over time if you're doing a lot of changes, so just be aware of that. Now, to do these deployments for the migration base nice and easily in GitHub, we can use something known as the DataOps PowerShell module, which is available on the DataPlat network. So if I go back over to the GitHub project, I open up the workflow, I can actually show you how the deployment's done here. So if I scroll down, this is why it's nice and easy to use the DataOps PowerShell module. So I make this bigger. The deployment is literally a couple of lines of code. So that is how you can do a migration-based deployment in GitHub. So now we're just going to quickly cover how to keep your secrets secret in GitHub, because you shouldn't put credentials like usernames, passwords, etc., directly in your YAML code. It's kind of frowned upon by auditors. So there's a few different places you can put your secrets in GitHub, and it also depends on whether you're using your personal repositories or if you're working using a GitHub organization. So for example here, if I go into the settings, I can scroll down.
Switch the screen. There we go.
I knew I was doing that.
Works a lot better.
Just checking. So as you can see here, you can put in secrets and variables in the repository settings. If you're working with an organization, you can actually put them in an organization level. So if I scroll further down, as you can see, all the security is there to put them in. So it all depends what you want to do with these secrets, whether you're going to reuse them in multiple repositories or just one. Now, you can also connect up the get secrets from Azure Key Vault as well. And I can actually show you this in the project we were looking at earlier. So if we go back over to here and I go back into code. Just going to go back into the workflow just so I can show you how it's done here. So in this particular example, I actually use a GitHub action. So, and that goes off and gets your secrets from the key vault. However, I will be honest, this action, even though it is really good, is now deprecated. They just announced it recently. So what they actually advise you to do now is to use the Azure CLI commands in your workflow.
Perfect.
However, when you use this to get, for example, a connection string, if you try and pull the entire connection string, you're going to have a little bit of a problem when getting the password value because of how the security is done in GitHub. So you'd have to figure out a way to concatenate the results. However, this action just makes the concept easier to show. So that's just how you can keep your secrets secret.
So, unit testing. So, I guess that not a lot of... Oh, so who is doing unit testing again with databases? So, what are you using for the unit test? Is that C# or is that any other platform like that? SSDT. Well, that's probably C#, right? So, there's another platform that we can use, that's tSQL-T. And tSQL-T is a unit testing framework built by, I always forget his name, it's German, but it's open source and it is purely T-SQL. And we can integrate this in our any kind of like a migration-based or state-based deployment. And it keeps that the developer in its T-SQL bubble, right? You don't need to use any PowerShell or C# or anything like that. And I like that because I have one language that I have to learn. It keeps it simple. So there are some, like I said, there's T-SQL that we can use. I am lazy as hell when it comes to repetitive tasks. So what I did was I wrote a PowerShell module called the PST-SQL test generator. What this will do, and this is in the PowerShell gallery, so you can just install it and use it. It will take a snapshot of your database or look at all the objects of your database and generate basic unit tests for your project, for all the different objects. It looks for object existence, looks for all the columns in your tables. Does it have the correct data type? And the same thing for views and functions with all the parameters. Saves you a lot of trouble. Of course, if you do something like integration testing and going from one store procedure to another, then it's going to be more work. But the basic unit tests, you can already get started, right? So if a developer drops an index, your tests will fail, or you should remove the test. Another thing is, if you want to do, Kevin showed a nice way to use the new style of .NET to create a SSDT project. I've got a template in my repository, and with the PS module development PowerShell module, you can use that template to create an SSDT project with the older style of .NET in seconds. And it already contains a GitHub workflow, an Azure DevOps pipeline. It is already available with a test project as well. So if you want to use that, that's already in there. So is there a space between the I and the T? Crap. Don't change your slides at the last moment. So you're going to use some magic, right?
Yeah.
Magic. I told you I was going to be pretty.
So,
any questions so far, by the way? We're going to go through it really fast. But.
In the warehouse projects, you often encounter the setup of a shared development database, which sadly breaks most of the Git workflows.
Okay. Can you say that again?
In data warehouse projects, you often encounter the situation that several developers are working on the same development database.
Yeah.
Which is a problem for the whole branching and Git flow thing.
So what's your question?
Well, the question is there any miracle solution for that?
So his question is, if I have multiple developers working on the same developer database, how do I solve that with my branching model, right? Well, that's where feature branches come in. That's where you actually work on different features, and they can use multiple.
Because the feature branch then is actually drifted from the development, because you have several developers working in feature branches, but all are working on the same development database. You actually have a mix-up of the feature branches and what is the state of the database.
Yeah, so he's explaining that if you have like a lot of different development and your development branch is actually further ahead than your current, than the other feature branches, don't trip, then you're in trouble, right? So what happens with that is you probably have to do more synchronizations between the development and your feature branches. That's something that obviously you cannot overcome otherwise. That's kind of, Git is really good at that. Luckily enough, if you had like SVN or any other version control system, that would be real hassle. So yeah, there's not really a different solution for that. Any more questions?
So I think being lazy, the PowerShell model that you've shown to create the T-SQL unit test, does it also create the sample data set or test data?
So the question is, does my PowerShell module create test data? No, it does not. What it does is it's really basic tests like the objects itself. you can create unit tests with data, right? So that it generates data and then tests based on that. But it doesn't do that automatically for you. So, yeah. Is there any benefit for GitHub workflows against Azure DevOps pipelines? I think both of them are really good products. If you are already in Azure DevOps and you have a set environment, there's not really a reason at the moment to change to GitHub workflows. But I do have a feeling that development of GitHub has more momentum at the moment than Azure DevOps.
Yeah.
So,
as we're about to reveal in this section, that because of the magic behind them, there are quite a few GitHub Actions appearing.
Yeah.
And I can show you now, actually, because that nicely ties in with the next part.
So we have to hurry up, so we only have 10 minutes, right?
Indeed. So, everyone thinks that GitHub Actions are probably magic, but they're not. They're actually just GitHub repos stored somewhere. And I can quickly show you this now. So, for example, if I open up Azure SQL Deploy and go to the marketplace listing, and I scroll down here, on the left-hand side, you can see there's a useful link. If I click on here, as you can see, it's just a GitHub repository that's been created in a special way. And GitHub provides a guide on how to do this, and this is why there's a lot of momentum with GitHub Actions at the moment, because a lot of people are doing that. So, there are actually 3 different types of GitHub Actions you can use, so container, composite, and the JavaScript one. And they can be used, as well as for CI/CD, they can be used for different levels of automation as well, as I will show in a demo coming up shortly. So there are various types of triggers that you can use in your workflows and the YAML files, basically. In the one I showed you earlier, the trigger was for a pull request for the main branch. You can have triggers for pushes as well. And in addition to that, you can also do a schedule as well, so you can have your workflows run at a certain time, which is really good if you're going to implement a level of automation. And that brings me over to our GitHub script demo. So GitHub script can be used to perform a lot of automation in GitHub. So, for example, here I'm in a different organization, and I'm just going to create a new issue. And I'm just going to see. I'm just going to leave it all blank. I'm going to submit a new issue. So if I go over to the actions now, you can see it's actually running a level of automation at the moment. So if I open it now, as you can see, GitHub script has run. It's very kindly assigned it to Sander. So he's got a couple of new emails waiting for him after this session.
Guess how many emails I get from him every single day. He's trying his new demos, yeah, 100 other emails.
So of course, if you're in the workplace, you can use this functionality. For example, you can put certain labels on issues, and they can be assigned to the right people. So finally from there, I did notice a couple of Power BI people in the crowd earlier. So I thought I'd better point out the fact that, yeah, because GitHub is an API, you can actually get the metrics out of it for use in reports. Now, I'm in 2 minds whether to actually show the one I've created now, considering who's in the audience. But I'm just going to go ahead and do it anyway. So, as you can see, you can actually get out the metrics for how many times your GitHub actions have been run.
So, I think we have just a couple minutes left. So, just to recap what we all did, like we have 5 minutes, perfect timing. So we went through a lot of features in GitHub. We went through the branching strategies and models that we can use. We talked about doing stuff either in the cloud or on premise or using local runners. We talked about the workflows, how you can actually do different triggers, how you can set up with all the actions. We talked about secrets. Again, if you put passwords in your workflow or in one of your actions, I see that too much. Bit of unit testing, really important, by the way, because if you don't test, you don't know. And Kevin did a lot of magic. So, any more questions? No?
And in case there are any questions, there's a feedback slide as well.
Yeah. So here's our feedback slide. Please send any feedback that it could be good feedback or worse feedback. Are there any more questions? I want questions. There's a question on the screen. So watching you rename a table column without the refactor tool is physically painful to me. That's not a question, that's a comment. But yeah, that's painful, but that's a demo, right?
Yeah. It's just to give everybody an example.
Anybody else? I saw some hands go up.
User, but I would like to set up workflow. How will I then be charged?
So the question is how I will be charged if I have an agent or a runner in this case, because a DevOps is an agent and in GitHub it's a runner. How is that being charged? It's charged by the minute. So if your task or your entire workflow runs for 10 minutes, you're being charged 10 minutes. If that is on a Windows one, it's charged 20 minutes. Do that on Mac OS, it's a multitude of that. So that's how you're being charged. You're charged by the minute with that. Okay.
There is a thank you slide as well.
About the refactor lock. Are you aware how far we are away from feature parity of the database project in Azure SQL Data Studio and the old SSDT? So, or post-deployment scripts, pre-deployment scripts, refactor locks, and so on?
So that's a really long question. I'm trying to wrap around. So your question is, how far along are we with the current SSDT project with all the post and pre-deployment scripts, right? Based on what?
To compare the Azure Data Studio one with the previous old-school Visual Studio.
To compare the current Azure Data Studio with the preschool. So I'm not really following that question. Come back to me after the session, because that's a hard question to answer right now.
By the way, I've just put up our details again for everybody as well. If you want to reach out to either of us, or you just want to grab any of the GitHub repositories, etc.
We have 1 minute, so we're done. If there are no more questions. Thank you.